Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the regular school committee meeting to order. Today is September 28th, 2021. It's a little bit after 7. We have the full committee here, and the mayor was unable to attend this evening, so I will chair the committee. This meeting is being televised by PBD Access TV. Real-time public participation can be addressed to the school committee utilizing Zoom virtual meeting software for remote access. The application will allow users to view the meeting and make a comment during public participation. We also do have live audience in the room as well. So I'd like to start the meeting with a moment of silence, and I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Hockman, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. During our moment of silence tonight, I'd like the committee and the public to keep two hugely significant PBD people in mind, both public servants. Peter McCarthy, who is a former state representative from this district, passed away a little over a week ago. He was a terrific gentleman, a true gentleman in every sense of the word. He's the brother of John McCarthy, for whom the McCarthy School is named after. His brother passed away in the Vietnam conflict, and Peter was a big part in getting that school named after his brother, and appeared at that school every single Veterans Day for the services that school went through. And more recently, another true gentleman was lost by this city, a former firefighter whose family is dedicated to the fire department. Mr. Joe DeFranco passed away tragically. So if we can keep those two gentlemen in our thoughts at this time, I'd appreciate it.
We'll rise for a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Now we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. We're going to start the meeting looking for a motion on the regular school committee meeting minutes.
Motion to approve the September 14th, 2021 regular school committee meeting minutes.
Second.
Thank you. We have a second.
Mr. Hockman?
Yes.
Mr. Olympio?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Arnottis?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries. Next, we're going to go on to approval of bills. Mr. Olympio.
I'd like to make a motion to approve warrant number 4871 in the amount of $1,192,681.51, dated September 28, 2021, subject to audit.
Second.
We have a second. We're going to take a roll call vote.
Mr. Hockman?
Yes.
Mr. Olympio?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Arnottis?
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion to approve warrant number 4872 in the amount of $16,405.85, dated September 28, 2021, subject to audit.
Second.
We have a second. Roll call vote.
Mr. Hockman?
Yes.
Mr. Olympio?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Arnottis?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Olympio. We are going to go to continued business, and Mrs. Dunn, the Welch MSBA project update.
Thank you, Mrs. Carpenter. Have a lot of things to update the committee on. First, the community meeting for the Welch School project was held on September 20th. That was online and broadcast by PATV. It went very well, and for those folks who watched it, I hope that they were able to pick up a lot of the new things that are being put into place in the in the Welch School plan. That presentation is also available online for anyone who may have missed it and would like to see it again. Those meetings will always be linked on the website for the project, which is on our school website. Then the school building committee met on September 23rd, And at that time, members were updated on the progress of the project. And also, one of the things that they had brought forward was the minutes of the September, I'm sorry, it's in our packet, the minutes of the previous meeting. It was the joint meeting of August 26th. Those were approved by the school building committee and are being submitted to MSBA by regulation. But this evening, I'd like to ask if the school committee members who were present at that meeting as well would support me. I need to make a motion to approve the minutes. And if you look in the school building committee minutes on page 5 and then into page 6, those are the minutes that pertain to the vote of the school committee members. And let me just find that. Mr. Hockman had made the motion, and it was seconded by Mr. Arnottis to proceed with the schematic design total budget of $29,973,821, and to approve the 3011, that's a form MSBA requires. So that vote was a roll call vote. It was approved by everyone. A copy of the certified vote form is enclosed in our packet as well, so you can see that. I just have to have the mayor sign it, and we'll submit that. But again, I'd like to make a motion that the school committee approve the Welch School Building Committee minutes, specifically section 17.7.
Second.
Thank you.
You've heard the motion by Mrs. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Hockman. Any comments on the motion? We'll do a roll call vote.
Mr. Hockman?
Yes.
Mr. Olympio?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Present.
Mrs. Dunn? Mr.
Yes.
Arnottis?
Yes.
Okay, and thank you very much. Also, just to let you know that today was a very significant meeting with the MSBA. The meeting today was to go over, it's kind of like a pre-meeting. They went over the proposed submittal of our schematic design, and it was really very, very detailed. They talked all about all of the facets that are on the Form 3011 and on our budget. Those were documents that were presented at the joint meeting. And I can tell you a couple of really good things. Hang on one second. We're working to be placed on and heard at the October 27th MSBA meeting. And at that time, if we're approved, we will be moving forward on the project. Everything seems to be in great shape. They give you a lot of feedback through the process, and we had very minimal answers required on the presentation. And actually today, I wrote it down, they said it was a very good submission, and they were pleased with it. So kudos to the people who worked on that project and that submission. But they also said that based on the calculations that they did, Peabody is going to be eligible for a 63.33% reimbursement rate. Some of those are points, they're called incentive points, that we have to work towards. Our base is 54.79% reimbursement, but then they have different categories that we're working towards being able to earn the points. And if we do, we have a total potential of 8.54, which would bring us to a 63.33% reimbursement rate, which is really wonderful. It's going to help the citizens, it's going to help the project, and I thought that was really good news to share with all of you. So we're moving along. We're planning the next school building committee meeting for October. Message will be going out to the school building committee members, just checking in with them. I'm running a little bit of a survey because we originally started our meetings when we were in person and we were meeting at the Welch. Now I want to make sure that it is still convenient for folks. We meet the third Thursday of every month, generally the third Thursday of every month at 9:30 in the morning, and just seemed like a good time to check in with people as far as the timing of that meeting to make sure that it's working for everyone, and if not, we'll be adjusting that time. But so far, so good. Everything's moving right along. So thank you. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. Does anyone have any questions? Nope. Thank you as always, Mrs. Dunn.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see, we're going to move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Vidala?
Thank you, Mrs. Carpenter. 3 quick items on the superintendent's report for tonight. We have some recognition of our Higgins 351 ambassadors. We have a MCAS report for the 2021 MCAS results, and we have a health and safety update. So I'd like to begin with some recognition. Recently, the Higgins picked their 351 ambassadors for this school year, and I am proud to announce that it will be Angela Fabo and Luke Maglione, 2 very well-deserving students. Angela is a proud graduate of the McCarthy Elementary School and a perennial Principals List student at the Higgins Middle School. She's an accomplished athlete. Angela excels both in lacrosse and hockey, and she's praised for her volunteer work throughout the community. Luke proudly represents the Welch Elementary School, and he boasts a perfect 4.0 GPA at the Higgins. He is also a multi-sport athlete, and he is the captain of his football team. And Luke is very well respected both on and off the field. We wanted to recognize these 2 351 ambassadors at the beginning of the year because they've already done so much. They led 7 days of tours for the rising 6th graders at the Higgins School this summer, and they were able to welcome them into the school community. And then on the first day of school, they were at the front. They met kids as they came in, and they greeted their fellow classmates, and they ran some also welcoming for the new 6th graders in the auditorium on the first day of school to make sure that they felt comfortable coming into the school. They also led the volunteer team at the back-to-school night last week, and they'll be here tomorrow night as well for the 8th grade back-to-school night. And on September 11th, to commemorate the 20th anniversary of September 11th, they worked with last year's 351 ambassadors, Connie and Noah, to deliver letters of gratitude to all of the PBD first responders. So they had students in the school write thank you notes, and then they were able to deliver them to police, fire, and EMS. So very proud to, first of all, announce that they are the recipients of the 351 ambassadors, and we will invite them to a school committee meeting in December so they can talk about all the wonderful work that they'll be doing this year. Okay, moving on. The next item on the superintendent's report is an update on MCAS for 2021. We recently received the test results from the MCAS, and as you recall, we were very adamant that we did not want our students or teachers to be judged on this academic test, and we wanted to make sure that we use this as a diagnostic tool. And it was really, for us, an opportunity to see where our kids are and what we can do. So we wanted to make sure that we're really looking at this as a snapshot. So we received the data. We recently had some meetings with our school leaders and talking to them about when they're setting their goals and how to interpret the data. And it's very important to understand anytime you look at these, any data set really tells a story. And this story is one of success and one of areas for concern. So a lot of this data will tell the story of a pandemic. It'll tell a story of missed school. It'll tell a story of fragmented learning, but it's also going to tell a story of perseverance. It's going to tell a story about the wonderful work that our teachers have done, and there's going to be a lot of opportunities to celebrate what they have done, and then there's some areas for us to really focus on. But I think it's important to really focus on the context of what this data means. And I will turn this over to Dr. Chase, who will lead us in a little bit of a review and then talk about some of the next steps that we have.
So as Dr. Vidala said, context is really important, especially when we've lived through a pandemic. So just wanted to bring folks to a little bit of a timeline that gives some background on where we've been. And I know if you're like me and you're on pandemic time, things start to squish all together, and it's difficult to know if we're heading into the 4th of July or Thanksgiving. But taking a look at these points up here, the traditional school year ended in March 2020. And at that point, the focus was really getting our kids what they needed in terms of social emotional support, technology in their hands, and making sure that they had their basic needs met. and then moving from there into, so how do we do this now that most of us are at home and trying to learn online? So we thought coming into the 2021 school year that things would be a little bit different, and it was, but not quite to where we needed to be in terms of in-person learning. So that school year was impacted by the pandemic, and we had 170 versus 180 student days across the state, and those 10 days really have an impact. That's where you get a lot of that upfront learning with students and getting them used to this thing called school and how to do school. So for Peabody Public Schools, we pivoted to the hybrid learning model. And I think that's made a lot of difference, and you'll see that in the scores and how our students fared. For the 2021 MCAS, as Dr. Vidala said, this was being viewed as a diagnostic tool, not just here, but across the state. And DESE recognizes that we needed a common data point to understand where some of the gaps existed and to be able to identify areas of strength. And one of the things that you'll hear from the state is this idea of acceleration versus remediation. So remediation approach would say, we just have to teach whatever it is that students have missed, versus an acceleration approach which recognizes the students learning up to that point when they were assessed, and then moving from where they're at to the grade level material. So the following slides start to tell us the story. This is just a 10,000-foot overview of what's happening in MCAS. And towards the end, I'll tell you some of the next steps that we're taking so that you know that this is just the overall view. Okay. So if we take a look at this slide here, this is provided by DESE. And this looks at our students' ELA scores from students across the state. So if you look at the left-hand column, there's your grade level. And then you have the 4 different categories from not meeting to partially meeting to meeting and exceeding expectations. And in that middle where you see the red numbers, that's where the state shows that meeting and exceeding expectations, how far off base they were from previous years. And you'll see that in most cases, they're single digits, and there's a blip at the 8th grade level of the negative 11%. There's another little blip in the 10th grade testing. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the slides. So what's going to follow here, if you can keep this piece in mind, is where we see different grade levels. So we start with looking at grade 3 ELA, and what you have here is 4 years overview. So in the left-hand graph, you'll see that you have the breakdown for percentage of students achieving exceeding expectations, meeting partially, or not meeting expectations. We had a great participation rate in 2021 with 98% of our kids taking the assessment. And you can see that exceeding expectations, there's a little blip up, and meeting expectations, you see that blip down, which coincides with what you saw on that previous slide. Over to the right, you have more of a bar graph approach to this, and you can see over the 4 years where our kids were scoring. One thing to keep in mind is that these are different cohorts of students. So just as these numbers tell a story, these are different groups of kids being assessed. So you want to see positive trends, but there is some fluctuation throughout the years. For grade 5, we chose to look at grade 5 for this because grade 5 is the end of the elementary experience, so we wanted that entry point with grade 3 and then where they end up here at grade 5. And again, you see those natural blips that are happening over the 4 years by looking at different cohorts. And what you really want to draw your attention to is the 2019, which was our last traditional year with students, versus 2021 in the middle of the pandemic. So you see that we're 3 percentage points off on meeting expectations from where we were in 2019, which is not huge. And so holding our own in this. As Dr. Vidala alluded to at the beginning, a lot of this shows credit for our teachers. Coming in, doing the hybrid learning versus remote learning and trying to hold that together through a computer screen versus being in front of kids for as much time as possible. We started the year off by talking about how teachers really do matter. And I think this shows how important they are, that when our kids are in front of our teachers, we get them to where they need to be. Okay. Grade 8, you saw that in the initial slide from DESE, that grade 8 was off by double digits, and here you can see that we are following that trend. So as we go forward and look at next steps, one of the things we'll dig into is what do the questions look like, and where did our kids do well, and where did they miss the mark, and the types of questions that they missed the mark on, and where we need to go from there. We also look at subgroups to dig into a little bit more about where our subgroups are falling. Are there particular groups of students that fare better than others, and then how do we mitigate those gaps there? So you see that our partially meeting expectations and not meeting goes up there. Okay, I'm good. Grade 10, if you look at the 2019 versus 21 assessment, you'll see that there's been a tick upward for exceeding expectations in ELA, and also holding ground in the meeting expectations. So dropping in the partially meeting and dropping in the not meeting. So that goes along with that trend where you see the uptick of the 3 percentage points, and really our kids holding on to the progress that they had before the pandemic. Part of it might be for us to dig through the story as to why this is happening, and one of the reasons could be as the students get older, they might be more able to hold on to that technology and be independent learners, but that's what we'll dig into later. As we move into the mathematics assessment, you'll see that mathematics has a bigger trend on the negative side. And this is where we saw double digits across the board at every grade level taking the assessments. And then thinking about across the state, you're looking at 17% at that 6th grade as being off target, and then less at the 10th grade level again. So this is where the work that we're doing with teachers right now really starts to matter, and we'll talk about that in the ending slides. So at grade 3, the entry point into taking these assessments, you see that we're about 10 points off on those meeting expectations, and you'll see that the not meeting expectations is particularly high. So those are our youngest learners, more difficulty using computers and technology, more difficulty doing things independently, and more work for us to do at that end as we look at them as 4th graders now. In grade 5, you'll see that we were 10 points off on the meeting expectations from where we were before, and that goes right along with the state. The good piece here is that the participation rate is really high. So again, you can start to look for trends and patterns and be able to address those. Grade 8, again, you'll see that in exceeding expectations, we went from 10% exceeding expectations in 2019 versus 0% in 2021. And that's a really important piece of data because you want to look at, what groups are having difficulty. And this shows that our kids on both ends, those that are our struggling learners and those who are our higher end learners, are equally having some difficulties and need to address. So it's kids at all levels and all grades that need to have that attention. Grade 10. So this is interesting at grade 10. So similar to the state, the gap is not as wide. So exceeding expectations remain the same, a little bit off on meeting expectations, and then the same for partially and a little bit higher and not meeting. So having some work to do there. The key takeaways, there is just so much that's available to us in terms of what we can dig into with the data. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but there's also a lot to be celebrated. That in order to keep pace and not have those double digits really takes a lot of work from teachers, and that is day in and day out of connecting with kids and making sure that a pandemic is not an excuse to, take it easy. And I think what our data shows is that each day our teachers gave it their absolute best, and our kids were better for it. Our educators matter in front of our students, and we're so excited to have them in front of us in person. And as a side note, if you could see the kids in school, they are just so happy to be in person and so thrilled to be able to work together again. We use these results not to look back and dwell on them, but rather to take them as a data point and as a part of many data points throughout the year and plan forward. So we know where we are, and now we need to know how we need to move forward. Action steps are already in place to accelerate learning. A couple of those steps include school improvement plans, so using the information that we have from this assessment to inform our school improvement plans, and you'll hear more about those, I believe, next month. Common assessments, just so happens that at the K through 5 level, we're working on common math assessments, so it's very timely in the sense that when you look at those assessment numbers and you think about being able to mitigate some of the learning gaps that exist right now, those common assessments will be key to doing that. And one thing to note is that common assessments are not to punish a student or a teacher, but rather to just generate some information that informs what we need to teach going forward. Finally, professional development. During our opening days for professional development, we spoke about what effective instruction looks like, and we know that that's more important than ever as we deal with these learning gaps. We'll continue throughout the year to find opportunities to get teachers the tools that they need in terms of professional development so that they can meet students' needs. This is a chart that comes from the state, and it looks at 3 prongs of accelerating learning. The first prong is a sense of belonging, and so students who feel welcomed in school and feel like they belong to a community are students that end up doing well on assessments. The second piece is to monitor understanding. So once students know that they're in a safe environment with adults who care about them and they can connect to, the next thing is to have high-quality instructional materials and be able to use those materials and then assess to see what students have in terms of understanding. So that includes assessments before they begin a unit and then assessments after they've finished a unit. And in that way, you can get a sense of, okay, what did they pick up, and then where do I need to go with them? The final tier is that strong instruction piece. So that's having a culturally responsive audit of materials to make sure that it addresses the needs of all of our students, whether they are a student who's an English language learner or a student who's in an honors program or a student that's struggling. Looking at the focused PD, to be able to provide feedback and observation on the curriculum that's being taught, and then moving beyond the general curriculum to be able to identify Tier 1 and Tier 3 supports. So for example, if you use an analogy of going to the dentist, Tier 1 would be everybody gets a cleaning every 6 months, but Tier 2 is you might need to have a cavity filled every now and then. And Tier 3 is more intensive support. And that's what we think about in terms of classroom instruction. Tier 1 is what everybody gets, and then Tier 2 and Tier 3, when we see a student that needs a little bit more, that's what we give to them. And then additional information for families. Family reports will be delivered to the district any day now. And once we get those, we need to sort them out and get them to schools. Reports are then organized and distributed, and families will see the report sometime in October, which will have their individual student and then graphs and information to indicate where their students are. And I'm going to end it there for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Chase. That was a really good report. Dr. Vidal, did you have anything to add?
And just to follow up, you know, I think as we look at this, we really dug into this with our administrators, and there is so much to be celebrating. We had hundreds of students exceed expectations from grades 3 through 10 in a pandemic year. And that is a huge thing, and we will be celebrating them, and we have some ideas which we'll bring to the committee. We really want to celebrate those kids that were able to exceed expectations, including 12% of high school students in ELA exceeded expectations in a pandemic year. So there's a lot to celebrate. Yes, there's another story here, but I do think that, you know, I want to commend this committee for really focusing on getting kids back to school last year, because it served our kids well, and it's going to serve our kids well this year as we return to school, because our kids are exactly where they need to be. They're in front of their teachers every single day. So, you know, we look at this, you can look at it through a bleak lens, or you can look at this through an idea of hope. And that's what we're looking at, this through our vision of hope, that's what's going to get our kids through this, and that's going to get them even more kids to exceed expectations next year. So there is a lot of encouraging information here, and we don't want to dwell on the negatives. We want to use that as information, but we also want to celebrate the incredible work that our students, our staff, and our families at home did last year.
Thank you, Dr. Vidala, well said. Anyone on the committee have any questions or comments? Mrs. Dunn.
Thank you, Mrs. Carpenter. Through you to Dr. Vidala and to Dr. Chase, thank you very much. This was a good report. I do have a couple of questions. On the action steps on one of the charts, I think it was the one prior to that, there we go, on the school improvement plans, could you please send out to each school committee member a list of the school council members, and make sure that when their meetings get posted, that we're also on that distribution list in case a member wanted to go to a school council meeting to be able to hear, some of the plans on how they're looking at their individual school and working on correcting that. And thank you. And then the other was in the next slide, under monitor understanding. It said, establish data teams and coaches to support schools and teachers. And I know we've been unrolling that kind of process all along, but is this the year, will we have a data team at every school working on this?
Yes, and one of the big initiatives that we will have is those curriculum facilitators that we've put in place at the elementary level for the first time. So we do
Yeah.
have grade level curriculum facilitators. They're working with their colleagues to create those benchmark assessments, to analyze that data, and in real time be able to start to address that. So a lot of the work that Dr. Chase and her team have been doing, really working with the principals. And so you'll see a lot of that in next month when we bring each school in to do the school improvement plans. You'll see that they'll go over their school level data, they'll go over their plans that align with the district plans, and then they'll talk about who the school council is and what all those meetings. So that, we do have a slide specifically for the school councils on each of those school improvement plans, and we'll be scheduling them beginning at the next school committee meeting and rolling them out. So each school will come before you, and you'll be able to hear their school improvement plans.
Very good, thank you. And I know we have to have accountability, and there are all kinds of different ways of doing that. And the MCAS is still a very controversial test. And people get very, very concerned about the results without knowing a lot of the why behind those, or the work that goes into not only preparing our students and teachers for the curriculum that they're required of knowing, but also there are a lot of variables, and the newspapers gloss over it. And if anyone's ever looking for, confirmation of why the MCAS test really, I don't know what the right word would be, but it's on that slide right there. That test and those results are published in the newspaper before anyone in the schools gets that information, and before the families get those reports about their own child. And I just think that if it was a really valid test, they would give that information first to the people on the ground that need to know that information before it gets published in the newspaper and skewered and headlined. And that's just my opinion, but that to me says a lot right there. So I want to thank all the people who have worked so hard on administering that test and on taking that test under very difficult conditions. And yep, we can always work on this. We come here, everyone works every day to bring our students up as high as we can on curriculum and on their achievements. And I'm very proud of our staff and our students for continuing to work and excel. And I wish them all well, because last year, that one, I don't know, they ought to wipe the slate clean on that. But I know they need to use it so that you can provide what our students need. And thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. Mr. Amico.
Chair, Dr. Chase, thank you so much for that report. I too am not a huge fan of the MCAS. I never have been. Years ago, people were upset that teachers would teach the test, and this is one of the reasons why I'm so proud to have brought well, all of us have brought Dr. Chase into her role is because she is an instructional specialist expert, actually. That's what she does. She's modest, she won't admit it, but I think the teachers and the administrators here in the city are very lucky to have her because I know she'll be doing a lot of work with them to make instruction meaningful and not to the test. And I think kids will be learning, teachers will be having more fun with it, and hopefully someday we won't even have to discuss MCAS. But in the meantime, we're in great hands with Dr. Chase and her instructional leadership, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amico. Anyone else? So I just had a couple of comments regarding the other slide for the district level infrastructure. One of the, and I'm not sure who wants to answer it, either one of you. One of them was establish an attendance team. And I feel like, I'm just curious how we're going to go about that, because I think an attendance team is going to take on two different types of attendance. We're going to have a COVID attendance, and we're going to have a regular, before COVID existed, reasons why people are not in school. So what is that going to look like, an attendance team?
So I think you're right. In this case, there are sort of two prongs. And so one of them, as we've talked to Desi, is really about figuring out ways to keep kids in school and being creative in that. And so there's the COVID side of things, which in the next agenda item, we talk about test and stay and diagnostic testing to really find ways to keep kids in school. And then the other one is what can we do within the community? And again, I just want to thank this committee for approving the position of the Educational Stability Liaison, who has been out in the community visiting houses and really encouraging kids to get on. So he's going to be part of that data team. We have our central office data team that's analyzing the attendance, but then we also have people who are visiting the schools and then going into homes and making sure that kids get what they need in order to come in. So I think that we have a team set up, but we're always open to, to increasing that team and to putting some more resources into it. But, I think taking that two-pronged approach is important, and then really working with individual schools to identify what their needs are and if there are any gaps in that.
Great, thank you. It's just, attendance is completely different now. It means two different things depending on whether somebody's in school or not. And I am going to ask for a future school committee meeting update on our remote learning, as well as how that's going to play into all of these things. I didn't ask for it ahead of time, so I don't expect an answer now, but maybe if we could put that on the next agenda, something from Dr. Lord. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And that also goes into engagement, right? And I think Dr. Lord will speak directly to that. Is there's attendance and then there's engagement and what is meaningful. And I think the personalized nature of Dr. Lord's program is really going to demonstrate some serious engagement. And so he'll also be doing a school improvement plan that he's already started to work on and shared some things with me. So we're very excited about that. And so moving on to the next agenda item, one of the ways that we are keeping students in school, we have a health and safety update that has two parts. One is going to be the testing and keeping kids in school, and then the other is going to be our late communication from the Department of Ed. So we have our testing programs up and running through the partnership with CIC Health, and I'm happy to report that the Test and Stay program started last week, and we had over 150 students participate that were able to stay in school rather than being home in quarantine. They did over 288 tests, and this is really designed to keep students and or staff in school that would typically be quarantined, or that would be required to be quarantined at home. So it's open to unvaccinated in-school close contacts that have completed their consent form, and they're eligible to participate. And so, as I said, in just 1 week, we had approximately 150 students that were able to remain in school. We've gotten a lot of feedback, and I spoke with one parent who shared that their child would have had to quarantine on 3 different occasions and was able to participate in Test and Stay. And we also have Test and Stay available through the weekends, and so we were able to utilize that with 3 students this weekend, and all 3 students were able to take a home kit and be able to participate in an athletic event over the weekend. And that will be open for any student who's participating in Test and Stay that has any extracurricular activity that is associated with school. So we're very happy about the Test and Stay. It was a little bumpy getting it up and running, but I am pleased to announce that our partnership with CIC Health and I can't say enough about the health department here and our school nurses and our nurse leader and health director. They've just done a great job organizing this and making sure that it's implemented well. And then finally, yesterday we started diagnostic testing. So individuals with minimal symptoms, they can get tested in the nurse's office and they can remain in school. So we started that yesterday. We already had a number of students participate. Now, if you have significant symptoms or multiple symptoms, and there is a list of what those are, loss of taste or smell, those are symptoms that we cannot test and have students stay. There are certain symptoms or multiple symptoms that do need to go out. But both of these programs, we're very excited about keeping students in school and getting them access to their extracurricular and academic programs. And then finally, the last item is I have 2 written communications that I shared with the committee today. These will also be posted online. We'll provide the links to families and provide a letter to families tomorrow. So DESE has extended their mask requirement until November 1st. So it extends it. It was set to expire on October 1st. And so as part of this extension, they have talked about collaborating with the Department of Public Health and school districts to really figure out the off-ramps for masking. And so as of October 15th, if a school demonstrates a vaccination rate of 80% or more of all students and staff in the school, and we have an attestation form that we're going to give our people, and that will be submitted to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, then vaccinated individuals in that school would no longer be required to be subject to the mask requirement. And then in alignment with the statewide guidance, unvaccinated students and staff would still be required to wear masks. So DESE is really working hard to figure out a process to transition from the full mask requirement into some step-down procedures. And so we will work diligently at the school level and at the district level to make sure we have all of the information ready for this committee so that this committee can then take a vote. Because these are the options that DESE has, and then the school district still has local authority to decide to come off of that or to go stronger and require mask mandates. So, we still have that discussion here as a committee, but we'll do everything we can to get all of the information to this committee so that you can make a vote, and we'll communicate that out. So masks are still required until at least November 1st, but we will work to get all that information as soon as we can, and again, do everything we can to keep students in school.
Thank you, Dr. Vidala. Does anyone have any questions regarding that? Mr. Hockman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Dr. Vidala. If we can start on the test and stay, the consent form in particular. I think that we've took a form that has some boilerplate language that isn't necessarily germane to this district. And I want to make sure of that, because a few people have called me about that, particularly in regard to pool testing and in regard to random testing. It's my understanding that this district is not participating in pool testing and is not randomly testing any student.
Correct. We will never test a student without informing the parent first, or we are not participating in pool testing. The only 2 types of tests we are participating is the test and stay for close contacts so that they may remain in school, and the diagnostic testing, so if a student has a sore throat or a minimum symptom, they will not get sent home if they're participating in this program. So these 2 are really designed to keep students in school, and those are the ones that we're participating in. The consent form was a blanket CIC consent, so I'm happy to speak to any parent. I've talked to a number of them individually just to listen to their concerns and make sure that people know that we're participating in just these 2 testing programs, and we're not participating in pool testing.
Thank you, Dr. Vidala. That was my understanding, and from what I'm hearing, that's the feedback that our nursing staff is providing parents as well that are calling with questions. So I'm happy to hear that. Can we, since we are using the CIC form that has, or at least appears that parents are consenting to pool testing and to random testing, can we please put something on the school department website saying that the Peabody Public School District is not participating in pool testing or random testing? No testing of children will occur without consulting a parent other than the test and stay. or something along those lines. And if I may maintain the floor, thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to the DESE mask requirement press release, frankly, Dr. Vidala, you're much more gracious with your gratitude to Commissioner Riley than I intended to be tonight. And I will continue to say that this 80% vaccination rate is a red herring, because when we get the data, and I really never wanted to get to this, but when we get the data, we're going to see that staff members in each building are probably below 80%. There are staff members that chose not to get vaccinated, and that's perfectly fine as far as I'm concerned. People have a right to do what they want with their own body, and I'm tired of the government telling people to do with their body. And whether it be horrible laws that come out of the state of Texas or horrible decisions that come out of Malden, I'm tired of people being told by the government what they should do with their body. So the 80% vaccination rate is probably never going to be achieved in the high school, the middle school, and it's certainly incapable of being achieved at the elementary schools. So folks who are listening, and I hope there are many, plan on having your children wear masks for the duration of this school year and perhaps beyond. I hope that you're right, Dr. Vidala, that the commissioner is working with Department of Health to get to the off-ramp, but I don't really give that much credit, and I don't really have much hope for that. But what I do like to see, what I do see in this direction or directive, and first of all, frankly, I'm happy to challenge the commissioner on this and put it up for a vote of the school committee and maintain local autonomy on this issue, but I'm not going to do that tonight because our chairman isn't here, and I think he has, I don't want the committee to act without the chairman on something as dramatic as this. And I think we need some time to digest a little bit of the information that Dr. Vidala and the administrators are going to provide for us in terms of vaccination rates within each building. So we'll see if we qualify on October 15th for this opt-out. And I hope we are, but I'm very pessimistic about it. But what I do like to see is that the commissioner has at least given us and the people we represent, the people that have elected us, in this representative democracy. I don't think Mr. Riley was elected by anybody, but he's taking a lot of action for us. But he does, in the last bullet of the two-page, I don't know if it's a press release or what it is, announcement of the extension of the mask mandate statewide, he does talk about discipline for failure to wear a mask, and he leaves that to local control. And in 2 weeks from now, or when we get the data, I hope it's 2 weeks from now or our first meeting in October, whenever that is, 2 or 3 weeks from now, I intend on bringing a motion that talks about disciplinary policies of this school district and what we have the ability to do or not do, because this is just an never ending ordeal for our students and our staff to go through. All people over the age of 12 that choose to be vaccinated probably already are. There were lottery incentives put out for people to get vaccinated. There are exclusion incentives now at the Boston Garden, at concerts, at restaurants, in cities and towns. Enough already. The people that aren't vaccinated probably aren't going to get vaccinated, and we're not at an 80% rate. So why are we continuing to put out these dates of October 1st and November 1st, and then at our last meeting in October, we're going to see December 1st, and our last meeting in November, we're going to see January 1st. You know, it's just gets to a point, and I'm on the soapbox. I'm going to get off the soapbox right now. You all know how I feel about this. So thank you for allowing me to chew your ear off for the last 3 or 4 minutes. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Mr. Olympio.
Thank you, Madam. Just a couple of things. Dr. Vidal, I just want to say that that in-school testing worked out fantastic. I just want to let especially the special education community that my son, he was identified as a close contact, and Nurse Tracy called me first thing Monday morning and said that they have him in the nurse's office and we could again, with our consent, he could be tested in school, and it was really a seamless process. She did indicate that you had to fill out the form ahead of time, but then, for the first time, a parent had to go into school in person. Is that correct, Dr. Vidala?
So in the morning on the first day, so if you were notified on Monday afternoon, we would ask that the parent come in on the first day just so we can get that confirmed negative test, so that they, you know, if it was a positive test, the parent could bring them in. But once we get that first negative test, they're able to participate in after-school FKO and ride the bus. And, you know, we're not looking to have barriers. We just want to make sure that we get that first test under our belt. Now, if it happened during the day and you had already consented, we could do it right away. And if we did it right away, then the student can stay. But if it's in the morning, we do ask that, you know, we're not putting people at risk on the bus and things like that. That's just for day one.
Right, so I would want just the parents to know that there might be a circumstance where they might have to, on the first day, go into the school, but it really worked out well. Andrew's been testing negative, and again, for people with students in the special education community, it's a home run that they're staying in school, so it's worked out well. It's completely voluntary. Obviously, if we chose not to have him tested, he would have to, you know, quarantine, but this is a great way of keeping the students in school. So Brown School was tremendous with the communication, and it really, really went smooth. So normally when you get calls from the nurse, you get little pits in your stomach, but it worked out well. And then then switching gears real quick on the memo that was sent to us. And Mr. Hockman, I read that last paragraph, and it's kind of double talk, if you ask me, because at first they say, you know, reading it, it's a local decision about discipline, and then at first you're like, oh, okay, well, maybe they are leaving it, you know, to the local communities to decide, but then it references mask requirements and it encourages progressive discipline, so that paragraph, to me, is a little bit of double talk. So I'm a little frustrated with that it's a little unclear. And then the other thing is, let's just say for some miracle happens and on October 15th, the Higgins and the high school are 80% vaccinated. Does that mean on October 16th, then the masks are optional, or do we have to wait till November 1st? Okay, November 1st. But again, that's why then they should just say as of November 1st. To me, that was a little confusing, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olympio. Mr. Amico?
The masks, and hopefully we can see them go at some point. I do want to bring something up that I read this week in Johns Hopkins, and I'm not someone who's going to force people to, you know, get a vaccine or wear a mask, but it's just interesting that here's what they wrote over the weekend, and it's and to Mr. Hockman's point about people getting vaccinated. 7,000 people got vaccinated today in Massachusetts. So if we wait another 2 weeks or 3 weeks, multiply that by 10 or 14, you know, hopefully that's another 100,000 that get vaccinated in Massachusetts. Those are probably kids, I would imagine, anywhere from 12, you know, I would imagine immediately when a kid turns 12, he's probably thinking, let me get vaccinated, right? Or maybe his parents are. But anyhow, Johns Hopkins writes, and this is about vaccination in vaccinated and unvaccinated people. Among the unvaccinated, the virus travels unhindered on a highway with multiple off-ramps and refueling stations. In the vaccinated, it gets lost in a maze of dead-end streets and cul-de-sacs. Every so often, it pieces together an escape route, but in most scenarios, it finds itself cut off and ends its journey. It can go no further. So put that in there for vaccinations, non-vaccinated. Again, I don't want to tell people what to do, but you know, God forbid one of us get hit by a car outside in the parking lot. I think we'd want to go to an ER immediately. So if we want to go to an ER immediately, if we got hit by a car, I think we'd want to listen to some of these people. Again, I hate masks. I want to get rid of them. I wear one 7 hours a day. I was blessed with this big Roman nose. It doesn't fit well. I have a headache coming home from school. I want to get rid of these, but hopefully people get vaccinated and we can move on from this terrible pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Amico. Mrs. Dunn?
Thank you, Mrs. Carpenter. Just as a point of information for everyone, I had asked Sharon Cameron for data before tonight's meeting, and she provided me with the City of Peabody COVID-19 stats as of last Wednesday. So this is the most updated one. There'll be one tomorrow. But right now, the percent of people in Peabody who have had one or more doses is 70%. And the percent who are fully vaccinated is 65%. Now, that's citywide, that's not the schools, but I just thought it might be helpful for everyone to know that.
Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. Mr. Amico?
Just one more thing, and I just wanted to go back to what Mr. Hockman said, and I really, he hit the point there. There's no way we're going to hit 80% in schools. You know, as Ms. Dunn said, it's 70% citywide. I would imagine, you know, if we broke it down to age groups, and I think Ms. Cameron did, and by the way, they do an incredible job down there, you know, over 60 would probably be 80% or higher. But again, what's the percentage from 12 to 18? And that's the age group that we're looking at. And to Mr. Hockman's point, we'll never achieve that at elementary schools. So I'd like to see data, if we can, broken down by age group, because then at that point, if we do have to make a decision locally, we may have to, because we can't wear these masks forever. And if we stick on the 80% threshold, we'll always be wearing masks. I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Amico. Mr. Hockman.
Thank you. My last point on this is if I can ask through you to the superintendent, can you please ask the commissioner what's so special about 80%? How did that arbitrary number become the standard?
So I believe that number was herd immunity. So they were looking at 80% around herd immunity. One thing that we have communicated to the commissioner is that it doesn't matter if 80% of our community is vaccinated. Many of our staff members don't live in our community. So those numbers aren't apples to apples. There's also a great article in Commonwealth Magazine that talks about for elementary schools, if 80% of the staff is vaccinated, the physicians are recommending that number should be enough, that you shouldn't be counting the students. So that's where the commissioner is going to work with DPH. So I'm not quite as pessimistic as Mr. Hockman is, but I do think that we want to look at this, and the numbers for our community aren't necessarily the numbers for our staff, and I think bringing those numbers back to this committee at the next meeting will help inform our decisions. I think we need to do a little bit more digging.
Thank you, Dr. Vidala. I have a question. The attestations, has that begun, or will it be, how is that working?
Yeah, so there is a form that we'd have to share, and that's the process. We're going to work with our health department around that. Some of the information they can get through their online database, and then we'll ask people to attest to whether or not they're vaccinated, just for us to get that barometer. But we're going to do that in conjunction with our unions and the department. So we have a meeting with our union on Thursday, and we'll talk about what the process should be, and then talk with the health department. So I'm hopeful that we'll have some much better information for the committee at our next meeting, but we'll also email updates as we get them.
Thank you. Anyone else on this topic? Okay. So thank you for that report. And we're going to move on to public participation. If there's anyone here that would like to speak, please come up and you can have a seat right here. You're going to state your name and your address, and the button with the little person on it, if you press that to speak, your mic will turn red, and then we'll be able to hear you.
Okay. Good evening. My name is James Sherry. I live at 11 Kittredge Street in South Peabody, and I have been a Peabody resident since 1978. Honestly, I've never really taken an active interest, not so much an interest, but I think some of the goings-on in the city, because basically I was working 50 to 60 hours a week and never really had the time or the energy to do anything else. Also, because I always felt that this city has been very well run, and I've never had any issues with it at all until recently. My 10-year-old grandson is a 5th grade student at the Brown School. And before I lead into what I wanted to say, I had a question about this agency, DESE. Is that a state agency? So are all cities and towns required to adhere to these guidelines without objection? Whatever they say goes. You have to do that, okay. So I've never had any issues with this, with anything that goes on in this city. As I said, it's a very well city until now. And it's not an issue with the city, at least not yet. My question here is, I've been reading and hearing a lot about this critical race theory. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, so there's no need to go into the ramifications of it. To me, it's very concerning. I think it's deplorable, and it's outrageous what these cities and towns are implementing into their curriculum, teaching 4- and 5-year-old children, 5th graders and up, that they live in a systemically racist country. It's outrageous. I'm 82 years old, lived in this country my whole life. I'm a patriotic American. And I can't believe what's going on in this country. It's not a country anymore. It's not the United States of America. It's the disunited States of America. And I'm very concerned about it, even at my age. I don't think anyone should be telling my grandson that because the color of his skin is white that he's racist. It's absurd. I'm sorry. I don't mean to get riled up. You can see it's very emotional for me. My question is, what is the Peabody School Committee Board position on this critical race theory? I know it's being implemented in many towns and cities across the Commonwealth, all over New England and across this country. That's why I'm here. I'd like to know what you people think about it, and if there's any plans to implement critical race theory in the curriculum of the Peabody schools. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate your time and your comments on this issue. Generally, the board does not address at public participation. I will tell you that you are welcome to speak to Dr. Vidal at any time. He can address that for you. And I will tell you that this board has not addressed critical race theory.
You have not addressed it?
We have not addressed it. And I would welcome you to speak to our superintendent regarding any of that coming into our curriculum. We can't address you here at the board right now.
I get you, okay.
But I appreciate you coming and your time.
Okay. If this agency, DESE, comes out with a directive that has to be implemented in the school curriculum, then you don't have anything to say about it. You got to follow these guidelines.
We do have some stay in curriculum.
We do.
Yes.
Okay. So it's not something that you're going to be addressing on the agenda or at any time soon?
It is not something that we are currently discussing.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Vidal, you could reach out to him later on? Yes, I absolutely will. Thank you.
Madam Chairwoman, I think we're going into written communications. I'm going to make a motion to receive written communications 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Those are received. We have written communications regarding Peabody Public Schools has been awarded the FY 2022 McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Grant for $10,000. So that is some good news. The other written communication is the Peabody Public Schools have been awarded fiscal year 2021 Integrating Social and Emotional Learning into Academic Learning Continuation Grant for $10,000. That is also in our written communications. And then we also have communication from the superintendent at Essex Tech, and regarding our appointment of our school committee person there, I'd like to point out that Mrs. Dunn has graciously been our school committee woman since 2018. She's done a fabulous job. And I know that the mayor is not here right now, but we do have a letter from him asking for her reappointment. If Mrs. Dunn would be so gracious to accept that, I'd like somebody, if somebody can make a motion to that effect, and if Mrs. Dunn would like, no, we can't make a motion?
No, actually, if I may, Madam Chairman?
Sure.
It's a point of information. The, in your packet, the material from Superintendent Riccio is her letter that went out to all of this cycle's communities. Peabody, if you see the second page, which is actually the legislative language surrounding the appointment and creation of the Regional School District Committee, Peabody is different than every other community. In Peabody, the mayor is the appointing authority, and it doesn't need any authorization from any other board. So no vote is needed of the school committee. The mayor did ask if I wanted to serve, and I do. I really enjoy working on that committee, so he has appointed me, and I would like to make a motion that we receive the letter as a late communication that was on everyone's desk to make it part of the record that he is appointing me for another 3-year term to the Board of the Essex North Shore Agricultural and Technical School. So I'd like to make a motion to receive that letter.
And that is received, and Mrs. Dunn, if I could vote, I would vote, but you've been appointed, and thank you very much for your time serving on that
Thank you.
board. It's
Peabody is
appreciated.
unique, as always, even at Essex North Shore.
Or challenging the Commissioner of DESI.
I think we sued the commissioner once, didn't we?
We had a lot of fun before with that. We also have some communication from the Massachusetts Nurses Association, and that has been received. Looking for some funds through the American Rescue Plan Act to increase school nurses and mental health counselors, which I believe we have done. Let's see. So that is it for written communications. And we will go into subcommittee reports. And the first one is the Education Subcommittee.
I have nothing to report, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amico. The next report is the Finance Subcommittee. Mr. Olympio.
Yes, I would like to make a motion to extend the ASME Local 364 Peabody School Supervisor units 1 year from July, the period's July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. That's to extend the contract 1 year.
Second.
You've heard the motion, and we have a second. Any discussion on the motion? Being none, roll call vote on that.
Mr. Hockman?
Yes.
Mr. Olympio?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Arnottis?
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion to extend for 1 year the Peabody School Administrators Unit B for period September 1st, 2021, and in August 31st, 2022.
You've heard the motion?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Amico. Second it. Any discussion on the motion? Being none? Oh, there is some. Mr. Amico.
Ms. Carpenter, I just want to thank you for your leadership on the negotiating team. Mr. Olympio, you as well, Dr. Vidal and your team, and to the units that we've negotiated with. Everyone's come to the table in good faith, and we're trying to do what's best for our school system and for our kids and staff. So just want to say thank you to everyone.
Well said, Mr. Amico. It is an undertaking, and it was a very smooth process, and I think it's good for everyone all around. Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Being none, roll call vote.
Mr. Hockman?
Yes.
Mr. Olympio?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Arnottis?
Yes.
Anything else, Mr. Olympio?
That is it, thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to School Safety Subcommittee. Mr. Olympio?
Nothing to report.
Okay. And we're going to move on to Athletic and Wellness Subcommittee. Mr. Arnottis.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Carpenter. We had a productive meeting tonight. The entire athletics subcommittee was there, along with the entire school committee, so that's always something you want at the athletics subcommittee meeting. We discussed a number of items, including where we are with fall sports, cross-country being underway, active baseball tryouts. There was also a motion by Mrs. Carpenter and Mrs. Dunn regarding the visitor stands and looking into potential options for bringing those back up at the high school. So happy to bring that motion forward tonight for a full committee vote. And if you want to call a roll call on that, or so it's a motion by you, Mrs. Carpenter, and I believe it was seconded by Mrs. Dunn.
Thank you,
request-
yes.
yeah.
Well, we can be co-motions on that one.
Absolutely.
The motion was to direct the superintendent to please investigate the cost of installing visitor stands at our fields, particularly on the other side where they used to be. And yes, that was a motion, so I'll remove myself from the chair, make that in the form of a motion, and Mrs. Dunn seconded.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Mr. Hockman?
Yes.
Mr. Olympio?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Yes,
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Arnottis?
Yes. Thank you.
thank you.
And just, that motion originated, I know Mr. Miko brought up a point of safety over at the football games up at the high school. We love our fans up there, and he made some great points about just making sure the place stays safe so everyone has an enjoyable evening up there. So thank you for that. And then Mr. Hockman did mention baseball lighting up at the high school, so they have the option to play under the lights up at the field. So thank you all for a productive athletics subcommittee meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Arnottis. Quality and Standards, Mrs. Dunn.
Nothing to report.
Thank you. Liaison to Parent and Student Advisory Boards, Mrs. Dunn.
Nothing to report.
Okay. Building and Grounds Subcommittee, Mr. Hockman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We had a robust Building and Grounds Subcommittee meeting earlier tonight. We talked about a whole host of things, including Mr. Scanlon provided us with a spreadsheet on some work orders and the progress of those work orders as they go through the process, and I think we're going to keep a little bit of a closer eye on that, and I'll make a motion that we have work order progress reports on a monthly basis at the school committee. So moved.
We've heard the motion by Mr. Hockman, seconded by Mr. Arnottis. Any discussion on the motion? Roll call vote.
Mr. Hockman?
Yes.
Mr. Olympio?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Yes,
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Arnottis?
Yes.
that
Thank-
carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to those work orders, Dr. Vidala described the process about the prioritization of work orders, and that it's something that we are going to focus on perhaps a little bit more as we move forward. One item that was repaired recently on September 24th, the Carroll School had an issue with their bell and PA system. It has been repaired and is fully functional once again. Dr. Vidala reported to us that the light pole that was hit by a plow at PBD Veterans Memorial High School, a crew has been identified, or an outside vendor has been identified to perform the work for that, and we expect that work to occur shortly. In regard to the lighting situation on Ferry Way up at the high school, Dr. Vidala reported that our staff, particularly custodians, can override the system and change the time by which those lights will go on and off, and that's a work in progress that should be accomplished shortly. Dr. Vidala further reported that the sink in the locker room has been fixed. There was a wall broken that was in the effort to fix the sink that needs to be repaired, and that should be completed shortly. The weight room at the high school, our new athletic director, Mr. D, is getting pricing on flooring for the weight room as we speak, and is looking into leasing weight room equipment as it's been determined that that's a better a better way of spending our money and getting higher grade equipment that will remain state-of-the-art for a longer period of time. We will have a future meeting regarding D-House and the issues that were identified in D-House, and Ms. Dunn who was not a member of the subcommittee but was generous enough with her time to spend the 50 minutes or so with us, suggested that we perhaps have a meeting exclusively on DHOUS, and I think that that's a terrific idea and something that we will do. There are still some issues going on at the auditorium, and I expect an update from Dr. Vidala in a couple of weeks at our next school committee meeting. We also talked about playgrounds. About a month or 6 weeks ago, there was a survey Mr. Scanlon put out to the elementary school principals, and two elementary schools in particular came back identifying their playgrounds in need of service or repair, and those were the Carroll School and the McCarthy School. And Dr. Vidala happily reported that there was some immediate action taken at the Carroll School with regard to repairing some slides and some of the play structures so that they're safe and functional. Principal Smith is obtaining quotes for the flooring at those playgrounds and is working with Parks and Rec on that, and we'll get an update on that in the next couple of weeks. The McCarthy School has put together a playground committee, and that committee is working or initially focusing on the pre-K playground, as that's the area that they've identified as has the greatest need, and they too will be working with Parks and Rec in regard to that, and will report back to us. We also talked about some things going on here at the Higgins Middle School, in particular the fence in the parking lot that was also damaged by a plow a few years ago, and the need to get that repaired sooner. We've talked about it a few times, and Dr. Vidala is going to get on that, I believe, and get that in the ear of the appropriate people. And then we talked about the custodial issue, particularly here at the Higgins, and the shortage, frankly, of custodians, and the fact that we ceded authority over the custodians a few years ago to the city. I've asked Mr. Arnottis to put together a joint committee meeting between the city council and the school committee, in which I'd like to participate, even though I'm not on that subcommittee. And Mr. Arnottis graciously acquiesced to that request, so that we could talk about the custodian issue and the need for more custodians in the school department and tradespeople. We're currently sharing tradespeople with the city, which we started doing about 6 years ago, I want to say. When we ceded budgetary authority over the custodians, we also ceded budgetary authority over the tradespeople, and there just seem to be some issues. I mean, there's just so many hours in the day and so many items that the limited number of tradespeople that are on payroll can accomplish, and perhaps it's time to talk about expanding those positions so that we can bring on more people and work with the city council on how to accomplish that in a budgetary sense. So it was a robust meeting. I wasn't joking, and thank you for allowing me to present this report.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. That was a good report. Any questions, comments? Mr. Amico? Okay. Being none, we'll move on to the Special Education Parent Advisory Board.
Yes, I'm happy to report. We have a meeting scheduled for Monday, October 4th, right here at the Higgins, 6 p.m. We'll probably meet in the cafeteria. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olympio. Next one is Liaison to the City Council and Legislative Delegation. Mr. Arnottis?
As mentioned, a meeting will be scheduled shortly.
Looking forward to it. And finally, the Redistricting Ad Hoc Subcommittee. Mr. Hockman?
Yeah, thank you. While I don't have anything to report at this meeting, I don't want the community or the committee members to think that we're stopping. We're just at a little bit of a standstill because we've identified an area that we think might be interesting to explore, and we're trying to work around schedules for people who would be necessary for that exploration. So we are moving forward. It's just kind of slowed down a little bit more than I would have liked, but for a good reason.
Very good. Mr. Amico?
Before we end tonight, I just wanted to, I was thinking about things, how we can help our students now that we've had time to come back to school, and the things that they need the most, and the things that we heard from parents way back when we were at home or hybrid. One of the things was obviously social emotional needs, The other big one was athletics. And I know we only have 5 more meetings. It's going to be October. We have 5 more meetings in this year, and before we know it, we'll be in budget season. So I just want to put a bug on our ears about 3 potential positions that I will bring forward and like to bring forward. One of them is one that I've been talking about for 6 years, is the second assistant superintendent position. I believe instructional learning was the part that we really lost out on the most, along with social emotional, and I know we have a great instructional learning person in there now in Dr. Chase, but having that second assistant superintendent, I think, would help out with all the other needs that we have moving towards normalcy. The other piece was something that Mr. Hockman and I spoke of at our athletics and wellness, along with Mr. Arnottis, about the assistant athletic position. I think that's such a key position, not only from the athletic position, but also the wellness position, especially at the middle school where kids are so vulnerable, and even towards elementary. But we would want to work, obviously, with superintendent and central office team to, if there's a way we can hire someone next year, to work with them and really put someone in place that can assist the athletic director's duties, because that position is not an athletic director any longer. That used to be an athletic director 20 years ago. It's a different position now. There's so many moving parts and pieces, and I'd like to see that happen. The other thing that I really been thinking about lately is these kids need guidance, and we have a great guidance department at the high school, but they do have a large caseload, and I was just thinking if we do think about our students, and there's a lot of talent up at the high school and beyond, and those kids that will be going to college in the future, let's get them into the best possible schools that they can get into. And I just think that maybe adding an additional guidance person at the high school might help. And if we have the funding to do it, it's something that we should really look at. Those are the 3 pieces that I really think, other than teachers. Obviously, and Dr. Chase said it, teachers matter, and we know teachers matter. These 3 positions, though, will assist teachers and assist students in their social well-being. I'll yield.
Thank you, Mr. Amico. We'll have Dr. Vidala consider those as budgetary items, and we can discuss them at that time. I appreciate those items. New business, Mrs. Dunn?
Thank you, and I apologize. Something came to me when I saw the school safety subcommittee. I'd just like to ask that we make sure that every school has a traffic safety subcommittee in place. At the beginning of the school year, there are always huge issues with the parking, the pickup, the drop-off at all of our schools. There are a lot of moving pieces to that process at every school. Each school's individual, but we do have a policy in place to have one of those subcommittees at each school, and I think that we should have those, and then perhaps it could be referred to the school safety subcommittee when things come up, because I do think there are some things that are going to be coming from the schools regarding their specific requests on school safety surrounding traffic and pedestrians.
Thank you, Mrs. Dunn, and I do believe the SROs are in on those committees as well, the traffic safety committees.
Yeah, actually, the requirement is that the committee, before it takes any action, that they meet with a member of the traffic committee, traffic division at the police station. So that's in place, and having the SROs there, they're the people on the scene. They know best.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. So if there's any other items for the next agenda, you know where to send them, and it was a good meeting. Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Good night.